Talking about how the smell of the sea makes our climate, and this is the sort of world that I'm interested in. Not quite sure whether you can see it quite so well, but it's like an image here that shows the sort of bigger organs that you may be a little bit more familiar with. Maybe I go to the other side. Oh no, there's a speaker there as well. Bigger organs that you're more familiar with. There's an albatross here, the bird, there's some penguins, some seals, but then they become smaller and smaller, these organs, when we go further to the left in that image. And also there are some of these planktonic copepods, they are called. They're like mini lobsters. They're only about 1 or 2 millimeter in length, but they're massively abundant in the sea. And Anna already, Nick maybe, I can't remember who it was, they referred to, not Anna, it was I think, to what is called diel vertical migration. So they show this migration pattern from being deeper down during the day and then coming up at night to feed, and then they disappear again when the sun rises. So this is also, you know, a time image here going from one day through the night into the next day. And this sort of encapsulates really part of my core research. I'm interested in movement to a certain degree as well, something that Nick has introduced. You know, how do these albatrosses, how do they manage to orient themselves in a vast open ocean where there's basically no visual reference whatsoever? You know, it's just water everywhere, all the way, you know, all the way to the horizon. There's nothing that they can really make out in visual sense. However, an albatross, you may know, they build a nest somewhere on an island, they've got their chicks there, and when mum and dad albatross take off in the morning in order to find some food for their chicks, they obviously need to have a pretty good idea of where they actually have to go, right? So they need to understand, to orient themselves in this vast ocean environment where there are no visual cues. Albatrosses have quite some well-developed noses. They are very quite sensitive to smell. So they use anything that comes off is smelly from the sea. And I've indicated that here in the sort of pink color. These are sort of wafts of gases that are given off by the sea. And these gases are produced by biological activity. Whenever something is being eaten, that releases extra gases, and these gases diffuse into the atmosphere, and that is in sort of the marker for the bird then to find these areas, these patches of high biological activity. So they search, they sort of move around when they're flying, and they search for these smells to then home in on where they find their food. For example, a krill swarm, right? So this has something to do with movement, of course. Now the key gas that I'm interested in, after all of this, the key gas that I'm interested in here really is called dimethyl sulfide, or DMS for short. You may never have heard about that at all, but you all know it as the typical smell of the sea. When you come to Lowestoft, and you can smell not just, you know, chips and fish or something, but you can also smell the sea. What you smell is actually DMS, this gas, right? Dimethyl sulfide. So it's massively abundant. We all know it, and it's everywhere where there's the ocean or the coast. We have lots of DMS. So this is it. A bit more chemical in a way. There's a structure on the left there. There's a sulfur atom, and then two what we call methyl groups, CH3, attached to that sulfur. So it's quite a simple, small gas, very diffusive. It moves rapidly, basically. And algae, they make DMS, right? So there's some seaweed down at the bottom there of the sea, and they produce that DMS. And it so happens that when algae come under stress, so when the sun shines, for example, there's lots of light, higher temperatures, they release more of that gas. That gas, these are the red dots there, diffuses into the atmosphere, overlaying the sea, and then accumulates in the air as the smell that we can smell. However, the sulfur in it has quite an interesting function in doing something with our climate. So this is how the smell of the sea makes our climate, the title of my talk. Because the sulfur can condensate to form a small little particle, a piece of dirt basically, that is required to make cloud droplets, right? So water cannot just form a droplet in a clean atmosphere, you know, gaseous water that is in the air everywhere we go, but it always needs a little piece of dirt, and there's plenty of that when we are near land, right? Because there's so much dust, and there are cars driving around, and they are releasing dirt into the atmosphere. However, when we are talking about the open ocean, very pristine, clean air, there are hardly any of those particles around. So basically, every cloud that forms in these remote areas over the ocean is formed through this process of DMS that forms the condensation nucleus to make clouds. So basically, the water then, these are these little blue droplets there, can attach to this condensation nucleus and builds a larger drop, which eventually then builds up a cloud and can fall out as precipitation. So one philosophical question early on in this sort of research was really whether algae can make their own weather. You know, when they come under stress from too much light and too much temperature, do they release more of this DMS gas into the atmosphere and cool themselves? Here's an example of an algal bloom just in below south of the southwest of England. You can see Plymouth here, there's a bit of Dartmoor, Exmoor as well, Land's End. This is from an algae called Emiliania huxleyi. All these white clouds that you see here. It's not clouds as such, but it's actually the algae that are distributed in the water. So it's a massive algal bloom, and they make very high amounts, high concentrations of this gas as well, DMS. And it's curious to see actually some clouds associated with the edge of the bloom here. So the idea is really, you know, that DMS that they're releasing, does that directly create then these clouds? And clouds, of course, they are cooling us. There's another example. This is the coast of Australia, the coral reef, that you can see a part of the Great Barrier Reef. And again, corals are massively producing this gas DMS as well. And you see just downwind from the coral reef, you see the clouds here as well. Of course, the more clouds, more cooling, good for counteracting climate warming, of course. Another example here is a tropical atoll. And again, you see some clouds in the distance here associated with the coral reef. Another atoll here, and there's clouds around it. I'm not saying that all of the clouds in this example actually come from that gas, because there are obviously other processes with uplift of air and cooling down and condensation and all that. But at least, you know, there might be a link there between the gas that's produced in the ocean and the cloud formation, and hence our climate. Good. Quite a few years ago, people suggested, obviously, there's this climate feedback link here. So we're now ending up with algae that make the precursor of this gas, DMS. The precursor is actually called DMSP, or dimethyl propionate, that the algae create in huge amounts. That can be broken down. It comes to the atmosphere, makes the clouds, and obviously that has a feedback, a climate feedback that changes the distribution of temperature, light, and nutrients in the Atlantic Ocean. So it's a direct link between the biology and the environmental conditions that these organisms experience at the top of the ocean. So that was the suggestion early on, that there's a clear link between DMS production and the climate. Then it's a climate feedback. Now I want to sort of take that away a little bit, and we want to have a more global view on all of that. Of course, you may say, well, okay, good. You know, there's some of this gas being produced in the sea. That's not very much, not very important. This is an image from Google Earth, and you very immediately recognize, you know, some of the continents here. We've got a bit of Africa here. There's Asia and Europe, of course. So this is just one side of the planet. When you turn it around, we truly are the blue planet, right? So the ocean is actually massively important in determining everything that we experience on this planet. Good, so what we've got in our Planet Positive tent, where I have a stall there as well, is I want to encourage you to come over throughout the day. I'll be there pretty much all the way through until tonight at 8 o'clock or something, when this is closing down. If I'm not around, you know, come back a little bit later. I want you to encourage you to make some DMS yourself. Right? I brought some seaweed with me and some little tools to mash them up, and then we can smell the DMS that is being released when you actually grind the seaweed. And then we want to judge what concentration that also might be. Now, the process that you will be doing when you go through this experiment is very similar to when you cut an onion at home. Right? When you cook, you start cutting an onion, you may obviously notice that your eyes will start to become a bit tearful as a result of that. And this is the result of this compound here, allicin, which is released by the onion, but it's only released when you actually damage the tissue of the onion. It's not produced all the time. There's a precursor there called allicin, and an enzyme that converts this allicin to this toxic compound when you damage the cells, basically. There's a rapid reaction, an activated defense mechanism that only operates when the onion is being damaged, basically, when something starts to eat on it. Right? There's an activated defense that uses allergen to then convert via the enzyme to allicin, which is the sort of toxic compound, really, or the deterrent compound. And something similar is happening when we do that with our algae. In your little experiment that you will be doing, there's DMSP, the precursor, there's the DMS, the gas, and then there's also this compound you're given off, acrylate and a proton. And all of that is part of an enzymatic reaction that also happens when animals graze on the algae or when they are being infected, when there's a pathogen around, it destroys part of the seaweed. So again, let's do that. I would say it brings me back to this lovely image. I think that's my last slide, if I remember correctly. To put that all back together again, these processes that I went through with you guys are massively important, not just for our climate, of course, for the cloud formation, massively important for organisms actually finding their prey in the vast open ocean, for organisms determining where they should start feeding, because these do this massive movement every day, I should say. Well, I should ask you a question, really, at this point. There's one particular species of this copepod here called Calamus helgolandicus, which is abundant in the North Sea and all around in the North Atlantic as well. Calamus helgolandicus, it's called. And that species alone is obviously quite important for the North Sea and the North Atlantic. Has quite a large biomass. What do you reckon of that one species of organism, how many of those are there? Is their biomass, their weight, if you catch them all together, is it equivalent to, let's say, the weight of a blue whale, the weight of a London double-decker bus, the weight of the moon, or the weight of the entire human population? What do you reckon? What is the biomass? We've got the whale arms up. We've got the double-decker. Yeah, come on, Terry. You go for the whale. We've got the double-decker bus arms up. We've got the weight of the moon. No? Oh, there's some for the moon. Okay. It's actually, many of you are right, hopefully, it's the same biomass as the entire human population, okay? Just that one species of tiny copepod, only 1 to 2 millimeter in size. And as Anna has referred to earlier, they do this massive migration every day. So the biomass of the entire human population is moving about 200 to 400 meters in some cases from the deeper down in the ocean all the way up to the surface to feed at night, and then moving down again, taking all the poo that Anna mentioned earlier with them, and then excrete that at greater depth. So that's the copepod story, basically, I wanted to say. So all of this is linked by these compounds that are given off, and DMS is quite an important part of that. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm hoping I'm going to see many of you over in Planet Positive in a few minutes or throughout